Welcome to my Victober wrap-up, but I have to take off my hat because I'm scaring my dogs. Aloha and welcome if you're new, or welcome back to my channel. I'm Marilyn MM, the baby boomer booktuber, and this is my Victober and more wrap-up. And I want to thank the hosts of this readathon, and that's Katie of Books and Things, Lucy the Reader, and Kate Howe. And I had a great time. I'm still going. I still have a few more days, but I wanted to wrap it up because November is coming, and there are nonfiction books that I want to read, and I want to finish some of the books, but I wanted to tell you about them first. The first book that I read was Silas Marner by George Eliot, and it was my first George Eliot book. I hope you can see this photo of the book, and I'm starting with 3 stars, and I know this is not a popular opinion on booktube because this is a beloved book, and this was my first George Eliot, as I'm saying, but I have my reasons, and because I felt that way, and I'm a very curious person, some would say nosy, but I went back and did some research to discover or to find out why I felt this way. Okay, so if you're not familiar with Silas Marner, it's George Eliot's book about a weaver and his life and what happens in his life, and it goes into a lot of themes, Victorian themes, and some of the Victorian themes, and well, you can say themes to the beginning of time, but in this particular book, and these are prose of mine, it's the struggle of the working class, the triumph of right over wrong, love, humanism, human kindness, affection, sympathy, and social outsiders and outcasts, and small town persecution. And it has all of this in one book. And I saw it, and other readers before me have seen it, as a Christian story of salvation, where change comes from beyond or from God. And you can only be changed by God, not within yourself. Whether it's an orphan showing up at your door or anything else that happened at the end of this book, which I'm not going to say. It's also about home and what makes a home. There's a family, and I don't have the name of the family. Thinking it's Cass or something, but it's a father and his 2 sons, and it's not a happy family because we're led to believe it's because there's no woman in there. At least some people who have, done analyses of this book better than I have seem to say. Okay, so what makes a home? Silas Marner is a linen weaver and comes from a religious community called Lantern Yard. And he's betrayed by his best friend, and who ends up marrying Silas Marner's fiancée. So this turns Silas Marner, he's turned away and he doesn't believe in God anymore, and he leaves the community. They betrayed him by saying he stole, when it was actually his best friend, who he thought it was his best friend, who stole something. And the community cast lots to find him guilty. And he he became bitter and left, and he went into another village called Raveloe. So that's the beginning of the story. And it goes on that he is also has a disability. He's an outcast because linen weavers were thought to be, it was part of the industrial age, and they were thought to be less than men, less than robust type of countrymen. So Raveloe is a small community with small-minded people, and that's the way he lives in isolation, except for he has to do business. So he lives there for 30 years as a miser. He becomes a miser when he realizes that he's making a lot of money and he's not spending it, and at night he touches the money and he becomes a miser. Then it's also told from the perspective of the Cass brothers, Godfrey Cass and his brother. One is totally evil, and one is he makes mistakes, and it's kind of thought of as because he belongs to this family of men. That's the way I saw it anyway. So basically the story begins when he finds a foundling literally at his doorstep, and he names her Epi and he adopts her. So why didn't I like this story? It's a story of redemption. It's a story of love, because he begins to become a human being again because of the love of a child. His gold becomes the golden human of a child. Okay, so those were the pros of the book. And after, people said it's a very sweet story. The reason why I couldn't get into it, and I had to learn more about the story of, what was George Eliot trying to say in this book. It's a lot about religion, though she had a great respect for religion, in her real life she left religion. And it has the story of industrialism. At the end of the story, and I don't think this is giving away the plot, but he goes back to Lantern Yard and finds out that it's all industrialized. And Lantern Yard, his religious community is gone, and everybody is like robots. And this is what the people in the Victorian age were afraid of, industrialization. So this book has a lot of themes, religion, industrialization. It's a realist book. It's realist book told in more of a fairy tale. And here's where I had trouble with it. I could not get close to the characters. I couldn't get close to Silas Marner. I couldn't get close to Epi, the child. The closest I felt, was maybe the woman who helps him, and I forgot her name right now, but she helps him raise Epi. She seemed to be the more person that you can identify with. And then there's like the men in the town who are almost like a Greek chorus, and there's some funny bits in there, and funny characters. Excuse me. But I couldn't get close to the character and root for them as some people might do. I felt that this was more, it was trying to tell trying to bring up too many topics and leaving the characters sort of to fend for themselves. Anyway, I gave it 3 stars because, it's George Eliot, and I can see the beauty in her writing, or her writing that is going to come, because I plan to read more George Eliot. So I hope I wasn't going into that more deeply. The book that I liked the least in my Victober Reads, I kind of wanted to know why, that I felt cold toward it. But please forgive me if you have other opinions, and let me know what you think of my analysis. If I'm wrong, let me know. I want to know. Okay, so the second book that I gave 3.5 stars to is Cranford by Elizabeth Gaskell. And I think that this book would deserve 4 stars if I had read it differently. I started with this book with small font. I put it down trying to find another type of book that had, because it was annoying me so much, and I found it on my phone actually, on YouTube. And I started listening. As a wonderful narrator. But ultimately, this is about another town, not Raveloe, but this time it's Cranford, and it's a community of women who are known as, in the beginning, as Amazons, and they live in genteel poverty. And it's funny because they're trying to live a big life with a little bit of money, which I'm all for, but they're really funny. But why I gave this 3 stars, well, 3.5 really, by the end, is because it's a book of interconnected short stories that was actually written for Charles Dickens in his book Household Words, or I might be saying that wrong. And so each chapter is a story in itself about the women of Cranford and their experiences. And it's told by Mary, who's supposedly 18 when the story begins. I don't know if these are mostly older women, and she is very much friends with Miss Maddie, who's what they called an old maid, and she has a lot of experiences, and all these women of Cranford, and it's delightful, and I want to read it again. But because I had such a hard time reading it, I couldn't really, and it was also the short story. I'm not a fan of short stories, even the ones that are interconnected, because it seems like I get interested in the story and the characters, and it seems that it's over too fast. Now this one is about the same group of people, so I liked it better. And I really liked the, if I find the name of the narrator, I will link it below, because she was great, and she got me to finish this book and to love it very much. Okay, so that's Cranford. And I'm going to go into a book that's sort of on the edge of Victorian period, and it's How Green Was My Valley. And I did a buddy read with Miss Reads a Lot, MS Reads a Lot, Sandy, which was a wonderful experience. And we just finished it, and I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. Now, how is this a Victorian book? I'll tell you why. It's a Victorian book because it takes place, the setting is in the past of it. Hugh Morgan is the child narrator in the beginning, and it's a coming-of-age story. Hugh Morgan in a Welsh village, and it's a family saga. And I loved this book so much, and I'll tell you why I loved it and why it's a Victorian book. In fact, Queen Victoria has a place in this book because one of the brothers is a singer, and he goes to sing for Queen Victoria in the book, and she gives him a special prize, and they frame it. And so it's definitely was written in the time of Queen Victoria, even though the book itself was written in 1940. So it's about coal miners in a colliery, and the families that lived in the Welsh village that they lived in the 1800s, going on into maybe 1910. In fact, Winston Churchill is mentioned in this book in 1910, but the book had already gone on, and I know 1910 is considered not the Victorian period, but it started before that, and he was the Secretary of State in England at that time. But Hugh was already grown by that time, or at least he was more than 10 years old. So I still consider it a Victorian novel. And I have to say that what makes this book a 5-star read for me is the language, the beautiful language and the imagination of what the singing was. They made a movie out of this in 1941, and I don't think that it could, I don't want to watch it except maybe to listen to the music, because I don't think it can capture the beauty of this book. You get so involved with the characters. It's almost the opposite in a way of how I felt about Silas Marner. Some people might think it's a little overly sentimental, but I don't feel that way at all about it. I felt that even the way that sex was portrayed was done in such a poetic, religious almost manner that it was beautiful. I'm going to read you just one line. Richard Llewellyn, who wrote this book, and I found out later he claimed to be Welsh, but he really was not Welsh. His parents were Welsh, and he was born in England, and I don't think he ever lived in Wales, but he captured the period and the style of life so wonderfully that he must have learned this from his parents. And what he does so beautifully is what many authors can't do, and that is to write one-line sentences that are sometimes very long and yet don't bother me at all. And I'll give you an example. I wonder, is happiness only an essence of good living, that you shall taste only once or twice while you live, and then go on living with the taste in your mouth, and wishing you had the fullness of it, solid between your teeth, like a good meal that you have tasted and cherished, and look back in your mind to eat again. He repeats another line throughout the book. How green was my valley then, and the valley of them that have gone. And something I forgot to mention about this is that it's also an environmental book, because he talks about the slag that is leaving, that is the after effects, or the waste is a better word for it, of the coal that they cut, and they have no place to put it, so it's dripping and it's in big piles all over. And how that's ruining it. It dried up the rivers, and the bird, all the nature was being spoiled by these coal mines. And I did hear that there are 2 other books that this is a series, but none of them comes close to this. And I just say I can't recommend this book enough. When I first started BookTube, and I can't remember, somebody on BookTube recommended this book. I bought it before I even joined BookTube, but I didn't feel like I can read a book that's this size, even though I was telling someone that I read Gone with the Wind at age 11, which was also a chunker. But I needed help, and Sandy was the perfect person to read this with. She really, it was wonderful to share, and I even cried in this book. So I don't cry very often in books. So, and I recommend this book highly. It's a very timely book in a lot of ways, and the way it portrays religion and how Hugh goes from thinking a certain way that maybe that came from more of a small-minded village and becoming his own man in many ways. So that's How Green Was My Valley, 5 stars. I'm still reading a sensation novel, which was one of the prompts. And the sensation novel is by Wilkie Collins, The Woman in White. And this satisfies a lot of the prompts because it has some women narrators in this book. It's a sensation novel, and it's also was a very popular novel in its day. In fact, I looked it up, and Wilkie Collins was one of the most popular, well-read bestsellers in the Victorian period. More than a lot of books that we think are how shall I say, more educational. But this book, I'm also buddy reading with Alba from Seriela. She's a Puerto Rican booktuber, and I'm Puerto Rican, so we have a lot in common. And she's also part of the diaspora who have left, we have went to New York as my father did in 1949, 1948. And because he left Puerto Rico, I was born because he married my mother there. But The Woman in White is a page turner. And it starts out, and I won't spoil it, but it has different narrators. And it starts out with Walter, who's a drawing instructor, and he's very poor. And he's walking along a deserted road, and he meets a woman in white. And she's walking. Is she a ghost? Is she not? And then it goes on from there to unbelievable, exciting places. And there's another narrator who's her name is Marilyn, and she's the sister of Laurent, who he falls in love with. And that's all I'll say about this book. It's I'm almost finished with it, but I was just telling Alba that I don't think I'm giving it 5 stars, but I could be wrong. And I say this only because when you tell a story with a lot of different narrators, sometimes you come to a narrator you don't like, and maybe he turns you off in a lot of ways. But I think this is a very clever. He writes so easy for a Victorian novel. It's the easiest novel that I've ever, flew through. So I really think this is going to be. It might be. It's a 4.5 already. Will it make 5 stars? We'll see. And I think that's the end of the Victober part of my book. That's the end of the Victober part. I also read other books for Victober. And one of the books I read is Detransition Baby by Torrey Peters. And I have to say that this is a 5-star read for many people, but it wasn't for me. Let me just explain. Now, this is a debut novel, and it has a lot of themes that are unique, that were never done before. It's paced well, and let me just read you what it's about. Now, detransitioning means that there was a man in this book who transitioned as a woman, and then he detransitioned as a man and got a woman pregnant. And that's the baby. He was involved with Reese, and Reese is she's really the main character in the book. We're following Reese, who had been in a relationship with Amy, who it didn't work out because she transitioned as a man. When Reese is a complicated person, and I think through the book we learn about what it means to be a trans person, which I didn't know too much about. So it's a very unique and mostly well-written book. So why did I only give it 3 stars? Well, this is a debut novel, and it had some problems with it that maybe, aren't important to some people. Maybe the story is more important. But for me, as a writer, I saw some mistakes that were made that are made in debut novels. And one is that she uses a lot of big words when smaller words would maybe be a better choice. And she also has like tags at the end of like she protests lamely. I know this is like nitpicking. We're not supposed to put tags at the end of words instead of just said, even answered. But that's a mistake that writers make when they're first beginning, as well as use big words. But the main problem I had with it, why it wasn't higher in stars, even though I read it to the end, I didn't DNF it, and I also, but I also kept on putting it down and picking it up. And there was a little bit of a tone of, I'm teaching you this, So it was kind of teachy and kind of getting out of the story a little bit to tell you this is what it means and etc. So that I didn't like about it. But all in all, it was done very well. And I see why it's a bestseller. So Torrey Peters, she's a best-selling author, and she has written a book that is unique, but still, for me, it had problems. Okay, so that's Detransition Baby. I'm also reading Her Every Fear by Peter Swanson, and I'm not sure how I feel about it, but I can't seem to bring it back to the library, so I guess that's a good sign. And I'm also reading Halloween by Agatha Christie, and I hope to finish that by the end of October, so I can start on Nonfiction November, which I'm very excited about. I want to thank everybody for listening to my maybe a little bit of analytic, going into the weeds, which I don't usually do. But Victorian literature is kind of scary to some people. And I think that sometimes if it's explained in little pieces, maybe more people will take to it. And I think it's I love Victorian literature. Not all of it, but what I'm reading so far, I'm loving. So thank you to all the hosts who made this such a wonderful Victober. And also thank you to my buddy readers, my co-readers, who made this also so pleasurable. And please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and comment and tell me what you think. And I'll be back soon with Nonfiction November. And until then, my friends, aloha.